Hello everyone, and I'm Autobot Sonic the Telltale Gamer, bringing latest everything Telltale Games, Transformers, and more. For today's Cyberverse review, we're going to be talking about Transformers Cyberverse Season 3, Episode 19, Thunderhowl. And with this episode, well, you could consider the last episode, Enemy Line, sort of like the prologue or introduction to the Search for Windblade arc. I guess you can say this is now really part 1 of the Search for Windblade arc. And I gotta say, it's definitely is a decent start to this arc. I can't say that it's not the most exciting episode, but there's not a lot of bad stuff with this episode. It definitely introduced us to a really cool new character that I'm always a sucker for these episodes that introduce us to brand new characters that hopefully get some more screen time as the season goes on. So we get another cool new character introduction in this episode, similar to how we got introduced to Jetfire and Skybite back in episode 11 of season 2, and then Cheetor in episode 5 of season 2. So again, I'm really hoping the new character in this episode does play a big part later on the line, because I know they apparently do appear later on throughout the rest of the show. I just hope they make their like a mainstay in the franchise. So we're gonna go ahead and see everything this episode did right and what it did wrong. Episode 19 starts out with Bumblebee and Chromia after the events of Enemy Line, where she came in explaining to Bumblebee and Ratchet that she has a way to figure out how to save Windblade. So Bumblebee and Chromia end up driving out together into this sort of dark, like metallic forest almost, where Chromia explains that she has this energy tracker from Camnus that basically allows her to detect the memory fragments of any city speaker, as she states that there have been many times before when city speakers have had to use up all their power and had their memory fragments split up into 5 different shards, as what happened to Windblade back at the end of the Universe Part 4. So Chromia has located one of these shards being in this forest. So Bumblebee and Chromia end up going to inspect it when they end up going into into finding Crystal City in there. Now, Crystal City has been a spot that's been appeared in many other Transformers pieces of media, like the G1 cartoon. My exposure to Crystal City is really in the IDW comics, where that's where Diatlas came from. That's where Drift essentially became Drift in the IDW comics. So I was kind of hoping that we'd get some sort of connection to the IDW comics, but Cyberverse's Crystal City is a lot different from IDW's Crystal City. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm not going to call it a con. It's just something that I wish that it was more like the IDW Crystal City, but I'm not going to take any points off for it. So anyway, though, as Chromia and Bumblebee enter Crystal City, they're just in awe of just how beautiful the city looks. And I gotta agree, because again, the Cyberverse team really outdoes themselves when they go all out with these just brand new locations that they explore. Again, like, just thinking back to season 2 with Wiped Out and Ghost Town, how the backgrounds in those episodes were like beautiful. I really loved this environment. And so while Bumblebee and Chromia are exploring, though, as they're exploring like this one crystal building and they leave it, they do cut, like, for its odd is that they leave behind these sort of crystal after images themselves, that when they leave, their reflections are still in the building. And this comes back later when Bumblebee and Chromia decide to split up to look for the shard. Bumblebee ends up running into who he thinks is Chromia, and Chromia runs into who she thinks is Bumblebee. But it turns out they are essentially crystal duplicates of each other. So Bumblebee ends up fighting a crystal duplicate of Chromia, and Chromia ends up fighting a crystal duplicate of Bumblebee. And so the two of them are fighting them, and it seems like they're getting overwhelmed, but all of a sudden Bumblebee ends up using his multiversal energy to immediately shatter both the Bumblebee and Chromia duplicates. But in the process, also frees this big Cybertronian wolf that's been trapped in Crystal. And that's where we meet our brand new character this episode, who is, of course, named after this episode's title, Thunderhowl. And I gotta say, I absolutely love Thunderhowl in Cyberverse, because honestly, he's such, like, again, he's a brand new character that was created just for Cyberverse, but I love the whole, like, chivalrous knight aesthetic he has going on. I love his design, how he's got the motif of the direwolf. Feels like he's like, if there was like a Game of Thrones Transformer character, I feel like that's what Thunderhowl would be like. And he's got such like the mannerisms of a knight, and I really do love how when he's explaining his backstory to Chromia and Bumblebee, it's told in a very stylized way that resembles a kind of like those stained glass paintings you'd see in like old castles and churches and stuff like that. And I really like how Cyberverse does their flashbacks and how they do them in stylized ways. Like we saw this back with Cheetor in, I believe, episode 5 Trials, when we saw Cheetor explain his backstory. His backstory was told in sort of like caveman drawings of sorts, which would make sense because he was around since like the Stone Age on Earth. But with Thunderhowl, his story is kind of told as sort of a series of like stained glass paintings where he explains that he was ordered by his prime at the time to destroy Crystal City for it being this trap for anyone who wanders into it, but eventually he ended up getting defeated by a crystal copy of himself that ended up terrorizing the nearby forest and city for centuries until Bumblebee and Chromia freed him. So basically, he swears his loyalty to Bumblebee and Chromia, and then wonders where, as they're walking down to basically the main castle in Crystal City, which Chromia detects is where this fragment of Windblade's memory is. He asks Bumblebee who the new Prime is, so Bumblebee tells him about that Optimus is the new Prime, though with Thunderhowl has no idea who Optimus is, which further shows just how long he's been encased in Crystal City for. And I gotta say, Thunderhowl's voice actor absolutely kills it, just playing like an over-the-top knight. He's voiced by Richard Orloff, I believe his name is, and as far as I know, his voice acting credits outside of Cyberverse are few and far between, and he has not voiced any other characters in Cyberverse prior to this, but he will voice a few other characters in Cyberverse later down the line for the rest of these episodes in Season 4, so I'm interested to see how his performance as Thunderhowl compares to how he'll voice later characters throughout this series. So once Bumblebee, Chromia, and Thunderhowl end up entering the Crystal City Castle, they come across this big crystal maze that Thunderhowl warns Chromia and Bumblebee about, saying that it's going to be really difficult to go through, that every time they go through the maze, they'll have to fight crystal copies themselves because the crystals make reflections of them. But Bumblebee says that won't be a problem, as he just uses his multiversal energy to power up him and Chromia, and just constantly just drives through all the walls of the maze. And I gotta say, this is kind of where the problem comes in this episode, that literally, with the fact that literally nothing in Crystal City is a match for Bumblebee's multiversal energy, it just kind of makes this episode feel like there's no stakes. Like, we know that Bumblebee and Chromia aren't in any danger as long as he has the multiversal energy, because it doesn't seem like he runs out of it. So Bumblebee and Chromia and Thunderhowl blast their way through the maze, easily destroying any of the crystal copies of themselves that they fight along the way, until they end up heading into the throne chamber where they meet the Crystal King. And so the Crystal King's just this sort of crystalline looking figure that sort of resembles like a humanoid figure that sends out a bunch of crystal Windblade copies to protect itself against Bumblebee, Chromia, and Thunderhowl. So all three of them end up battling the Windblade copies, with Chromia and Thunderhowl buying Bumblebee enough time to get to the Crystal King. But before he can destroy him, several more Windblade copies come out and pin down Bumblebee. But of course, since Bumblebee's not really in trouble, so he uses his multiversal energy to instantly kill the Crystal King and all the other Windblade copies, and therefore freeing Windblade Star in the process. And again, I gotta say, as great as it was to see Crystal City and Thunderhowl being a great character, I will say that the lack of stakes in this episode, because of the fact that Bumblebee's multiversal energy just immediately beats all of the crystal things. Like, as soon as he powers up, there's no way he can lose. Why doesn't he just stay in the multiversal energy state, boosted state, for the entire episode? It just makes no sense in my opinion, and also just doesn't really make the episode feel exciting at all. It's cool, don't get me wrong, like, I love the concept of Crystal City, I think Thunderhowl's a great character, but I just felt like, oh, well, let me guess, Bumblebee's gonna use his multiversal energy to just take down the Crystal King just like every other time, so there's no real stakes in this episode. But anyway, Chromia and Bumblebee managed to secure the fragment of Windblade's memory, which happens to be like her right arm and sword. So I'm imagining this is kind of like Mega Man X2 with X getting all of Zero's parts, or even like kind of like reminds me of Transformers Prime Season 2 when they were getting all the Omega keys. It reminds me of like one of those arcs where they're just collecting different bits every episode until they finally have all of it. So they end up going back to Cybertron, or they are in Cybertron. They end up going back to Iacon to give Ratchet the Windblade fragment so that he can restore it to her. And at the same time, the episode ends with this kind of funny moment where Thunderhowl goes to meet with Optimus, who's still in the process of doing reconstruction in Iacon, basically swearing his loyalty to Optimus while he's clearly struggling with some. I think that's a cute way to end it, and hopefully we get to see more of Thunderhowl in later episodes, because I think he's a great character to just leave out for just one episode like this. And so that was my review of Transformers Cyberverse Season 3, Episode 19, Thunderhowl. If I had to rate this episode, I would probably give it a 7.5 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10. Thunderhowl is a great character. I absolutely love him, and I love his design, his mannerisms. Richard Orloff does a great job voicing him. I love the that we got some more bonding moments between Bumblebee and Chromia, because again, Chromia is kind of a character we didn't really get to see a lot of this series. We saw her a little bit in season 1. She had her little moments back in the very first episode of this season, but now we've got more episodes of Chromia. I'm glad to see that she's taking up being a more major character. And again, another thing I forgot to mention, that Chromia is actually voiced by Jamie Lamchick, who is also the voice of RC in Cyberverse, and it's cool to see Jamie Lamchick play. Well, she voices RC as a very kind of aloof character and very friendly. Chromia is a bit more down to earth. Kind of reminds me a bit more of Prime RC in that time. So it's cool to see Jamie Lamchick kind of fluctuate between voicing a more easygoing character like RC and a more serious one like Chromia. And I like that dynamic and how well she portrays the two of them. But besides that, the fact that there's no real stakes in this episode because Bumblebee's multiversal energy just beats everything just seems to makes the episode a little underwhelming in my opinion. But that's going to be it for this review. I'll be back soon with episode 20, Wild Wild Wheel. If you like this review, be sure to like, comment, and of course subscribe, and I will see you guys later. Take it away, Bumblebee.
Bumblebee out.
And I might know what our future, but then you still control the